welcome to The Truth Factor. Today, we're going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ and some questions over the centuries that have been raised about that, some alternative theories to whether he really did die and rise from the dead. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to do this in two parts. There are 4 different theories we're going to talk about. And if you want to look in depth about more on this, you can. I'll have some information below where you can have some references to Josh McDowell's New Evidence That Demands a Verdict, etc. So let's get into this. And the Bible says that Jesus said that he's the good shepherd, that he lays down his life for the sheep. He has the power to lay it down, and no man takes it from him. He lays it down himself, and he has the power to take it up again, and this authority he has from his Father. So you can find that statement in John chapter 10. Well, that's a powerful statement for a person, a human being, to make. And so as we all know, he was crucified. That is a historical fact. The Romans keep records. And so he was crucified, put in a tomb, and 3 days later, that tomb was empty. What happened? Well, there is a theory. It's called the swoon theory. Oh, swoon, what is that? That's an old-timey way of saying he fainted on the cross. He didn't really die. He fainted, he passed out. And that was seen as death. And he was taken down from the cross, unconscious, but not dead, and wrapped up and put in the tomb. And then in the coolness of the tomb and the peace, the lying there, his body got resuscitated, and he was able to get up and leave the tomb and go appear before his disciples, and they have gone on to say that he rose from the dead. Well, let's take a look at that theory and some of the possibilities we're looking at. First of all, it was a group of Roman guards headed by a centurion who had the job of executing him and a couple others that day on the cross. And when a Roman group of soldiers is given a job to do, they want to make sure that it got done. And I think we can all agree that a Roman centurion is very familiar with a live body and a dead body. Lots of experience there. The scriptures tell us that, and this you'll find in the Gospel of John, which, by the way, anything you want to check out on these stories, if you look at any of the first 4 books of the New Testament, we call them the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, in the Gospel of John, this is specifically mentioned. And in any of those Gospels, just look in the last 2 or 3 chapters, and you can find this information when I refer to something that's in the Bible about his death and resurrection. The Gospel of John mentions this particular part, that the centurion put a spear into Jesus' side. It actually was his rib area where you would have had the heart cavity. And that was because, let me give you a little back information in case you're not familiar with this. Crucifixion was a slow death, not something that happened quickly, because it was not a death that happened because of shed blood. It was a death that happened because of suffocation. After a while, the person got tired of pushing up to give their lungs some breath, and then, of course, in weakness would drop back down, and they would push up and take a breath, and very terrible death. It would take days for a normal person to pass away. So these 3 men, Jesus and 2 criminals, are on these crosses, and the Jews have a very high holy day. That's the Passover. It's not just a usual Sabbath. This is the Passover. So they go to Pilate and they say, hey, we have some special holy days. Many people are coming to Jerusalem. We really can't have these bodies on the crosses. This has to happen faster than the norm. Well, the Romans had a way of taking care of that. They would come along and break the person's legs, and then they can't push up, take a breath, so the death comes faster. Well, when they came to Jesus, the centurion's like, this man looks like he's already dead. We don't need to break his legs, which, by the way, was a fulfillment of an Old Testament prophecy. And I'm going to put a link up here where you can go to another video where I talk about the prophecies and some interesting things about that. But it said in Exodus, none of his bones would be broken. So that was fulfilled. Jesus had already given up his spirit, as the scriptures say. Like he said, I lay my life down. I have the power to lay my life down. And he gave up his spirit. He was already dead. And that was very quick, and they were surprised. So the centurion wanted to make sure. So he put his spear in his side, not to kill him. He would have broken his legs to do that. But he was testing to see if this was a dead man. And the record says that out from that wound came blood and water. Well, there's a biological fact, and I'm not saying the centurion knew this biological fact, but he knew from experience what happens when you put a spear inside a dead person or someone who's been dead for a little while. The heart's not beating, obviously, and so the blood is not moving, and the heavier red blood platelets will sink and separate from the more lighter weight watery plasma. There's a link below here with an article by a doctor that says this. So the fact that there was water or plasma separated out from the red blood indicated to the centurion, yes, this man is dead. And in fact, Pilate was surprised he was dead so quickly and checked with the centurion, and the centurion verified. He knew, by the way, that if he didn't do his job, he was going to be in big trouble. This man was dead, according to Romans. So there's one problem with the swoon theory right there. Let's go on. So now we have, let's say, an unconscious person, according to the swoon theory, that this unconscious person is in the grave and revives. So now, bear in mind, in these 3 days, he's not had any water, he's not had any food, he's not had any type of treatment to his wounds. He has been bandaged with the wrap of a dead body. They wrapped the dead body. By the way, that was a tight wrapping, and it was mingled with myrrh and spices, because that's how they did it, and that's sticky. It has a way of making those bandages stick together. Well, if Jesus revives and he's going to now walk out of this tomb, he's going to have to take these bandages off because he can't move his feet very well, which, by the way, he doesn't have on any clothes other than those bandages. So that's kind of odd. But let's say that he was able to do that. And that's what would have to happen with the swoon theory. He would have to go to this huge stone and roll it back by himself, very weak from everything he had gone through. There's now a Roman guard outside the tomb because the religious leaders remembered that he had said he was going to rise again. They did not want this body to be able to be stolen by his disciples. The disciples are the ones who had entombed him. There was a disciple of Jesus who actually was a part of a Jewish religious leadership, Joseph of Arimathea. But he was a believer in secret. At that point, he kept his belief as a secret. But he went to Pilate, got permission to take the body, and he's the one that had this tomb that the body could be put in. So Joseph of Arimathea, a lot of the women who were there at the cross, John was there at the cross. We don't have any other names. We do know that most of the disciples had fled and they were in hiding. They were not around, but there were whoever were there, and they helped Joseph take the body and entomb it. And it also says that Nicodemus, another Pharisee that had come to Jesus at night and asking questions, he was there, and he was the one that brought the spices. So if anyone's wondering, how did these disciples who really didn't have a whole lot of money get these expensive things? Well, there were some other people involved. So you've got this wrapping. It could be all sticky. It's very tight. He's got to get this off. He's got to go to the rock at the door, roll it back. A very weakened person that it would actually take several men to roll back. The Roman guards are there because the Jews had requested from Pilate a group of guards to make sure the body wasn't stolen so that his disciples could spread a lie that he was risen. And so Jesus is supposed to get away, fight off these guards, somehow sneak away around them, and then on these very wounded feet, walk all the way into Jerusalem and get to the disciples, and somehow in this wounded, weakened state, he's going to give them a convincing appearance that he's risen and, has power over death. Would not be a very convincing scene. So a lot of holes in this swoon theory, because we know that the disciples had a very strong belief once they saw Jesus out of the tomb, risen according to Christianity. So there's the swoon theory. Let's talk about another one. Now, this one is the one that the Jewish leaders, religious leaders, said actually did happen. They asked Pilate for the guard so the disciples could not come and steal him away. But somehow the Roman guards fell asleep and the disciples did come and steal him away. There's a very interesting part in the Gospel of Matthew. It's in the very last chapter that talks about the resurrection. And this is where it says that the guards actually saw the angel come, roll the stone away. There was a shaking of the ground, and they fell down for fear of him. They were not asleep at that point, and they went into the city and told the Jewish religious leaders about this. And the only solution for them was to say, we'll just say you fell asleep. Imagine yourself as a Roman guard. You have a dead prisoner. You're guarding a dead prisoner. But, when a Roman guard is set, or any kind of soldier guard is set, they have a group that this is the group that will be sleeping and this is the group that will not be sleeping. This was serious business, because for a Roman soldier to lose their prisoner, that is a death sentence for a Roman soldier. They weren't about to lose a dead prisoner. And all of their cronies back in the praetorium, they would have been treated horribly and, of course, had a death sentence. So they weren't going to let that happen. They were not going to fall asleep. Another thing is that someone could say, well, they were guarding a dead prisoner. They really didn't see it as very serious. They could fall asleep and not take it seriously. Actually, the Roman soldiers were very familiar with some radical Jewish groups who cared very much about their nation, and they believed they were not supposed to be being ruled over by this other empire that did not believe in their God, and they would rise up and have insurrections. Barabbas, who was released at Jesus's hearing and trial with Pilate, he was one of those. So the Roman soldiers were very familiar with how strong some Jewish religious people could care. And here, all they knew probably was that this was a religious leader of a certain group, and the disciples might come. In their minds, I can very easily see them thinking, there could be a fanatical group coming at night with clubs and who knows what kind of, weapons, and we need to be on the guard. So very likely they were on the guard for this. And the most convincing piece that would say that the disciples could not have stolen the body is two things. Number one, when Jesus was arrested in the garden, they fled. And they were in hiding, and they were scared. They were not about to come try. These were not warrior insurrection types, actually, these disciples. They were not about to come try to do this with a Roman soldier that has a sword 3 feet long, is skilled in battle, and Pilate had his governor's seal on there. That was a death sentence if you broke that. They were not of that mindset. But after they saw the risen Lord, they were changed men. They were changed people. They had a boldness. They had a seriousness. They had a fervor that they were willing now to go out and publicly proclaim and stand up to whatever the results may be. And they said that at numerous times if you were to read in the book of Acts. They spoke up and said, it doesn't matter. They were willing to die for this. No one is going to live the rest of their life perpetrating something they know to be a lie. If they had stolen the body and perpetrated a lie, all these years and all the things they did and all the things they endured to spread this word and some of the persecutions and the threats on their lives, and they ultimately did, most of them die a martyr's death. They went to their deaths with this message on their lips that Jesus is risen. People don't do that for a lie that they know to be a lie, especially if they were the creators of that lie. Well, those are two theories, and we've looked at some of the reasoning and facts regarding what could really be the case here. I want to close out this segment, part one. We're going to go to the next two in part two. I want to share with you a postcard that I've had for a long time that has basically makes a statement about one of the biggest issues regarding this whole thing. And then I will see you in part two.
Here's a cartoon I've had for many years, published by Jews for Jesus. It starts with the disciples saying, Jesus is risen. We have seen him. Wow. Now we have the religious leaders getting word of this. Hey, shut those guys up. Yeah, shut them up. There's the Roman centurion. Just show them the body. I mean, he thought they had the body. He posted a guard. Another religious